Welcome to episode 8. Today we're in Port Adelaide, South Australia, where a new cultural centre is being built. In a few months' time, this will be a great place to learn more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures in Australia. In today's episode, we'll be learning about a couple of important traditions that help to show respect to Australia's Indigenous peoples. Today's episode is taken from Part 1 of Australian Citizenship, Our Common Bond. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people should be aware that this video may contain images of deceased persons. We're going to have a look at Welcome to Country and Acknowledgement of Country Protocols on page 12. A welcome to country is a cultural practice performed by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander custodian of the local region, welcoming visitors to their traditional land. The word custodian means caretaker. Aboriginal peoples see themselves as caretakers of their mob's land. Indigenous peoples believe that rather than owning land, each person belongs to a piece of land that they're related to through the kinship system. That person is entrusted with the knowledge and responsibility to care for their land, providing a deep sense of identity, purpose, and belonging. This deep relationship between people and the land is often described as connection to country. A welcome to country was traditionally performed to ensure visitors had a safe and protected journey during their time on the land. A welcome to country can take place through many forms, including songs, dances, smoking ceremonies, or speeches in traditional language or English. A welcome to country is usually the first item of proceedings to open an event. Proceedings describe the events of an occasion, meeting, ceremony, or any organized series of actions. Let's say the key words together. Welcome to country. Custodian. Proceedings. Safe and protected journey. It's important to understand that a welcome to country can only be performed by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person. An acknowledgement of country can be performed by anyone. An acknowledgement of country is an opportunity to recognize that the gathering is on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander land. To recognize is to acknowledge, accept, or approve something officially, or to admit that something is true. The acknowledgement of country is a way to pay respect to traditional custodians, particularly elders past and present. To pay respect means to express respect for someone or something, often through a polite visit or a gesture of acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of country is a way to pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance. An acknowledgement of country is usually delivered as part of the welcome and housekeeping at meetings and events. The word housekeeping in this case isn't talking about cleaning. Housekeeping in a meeting is when the speaker introduces what will happen during the meeting. They may remind people where the emergency exits are in case of evacuation, talk about when there will be breaks for morning tea or lunch, remind people to put their mobile phones on silent, etc. Anyone can deliver an acknowledgement of country. At meetings or events, this would generally be done by the chair or master of ceremonies. We're not talking about a chair that you sit on here, even though the spelling is exactly the same. In this case, chair means the person who leads the meeting. A master of ceremonies is similar. This is the person who introduces speakers in the meeting. These practices are performed to show respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Let's say the key words together. Acknowledgement of country. Recognize. Pay respect. Housekeeping. Chair. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have experienced a long history of exclusion from Australian history books, the Australian flag, the Australian anthem, and for many years, Australian democracy. This history of dispossession and colonization is at the heart of the disparity between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and other Australians today. Including recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in events, meetings, and national symbols contributes to ending the exclusion that has been so damaging. Incorporating welcoming and acknowledgement protocols into official meetings and events recognizes Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional owners of land and shows respect. You may hear some people in Australia ask why a welcome to country is necessary, especially if they were born in Australia and their family has lived in Australia for several generations. It's important to remember that Aboriginal peoples have lived on the land now known as Australia for 60,000 years. It's only been 237 years since the first fleet from Britain first landed in Australia. Whilst European settlement in Australia has brought development and prosperity, this has often happened at the expense of the Indigenous peoples. Over the past couple of centuries, countries such as New Zealand, the United States, and Canada entered into treaties with the Indigenous peoples of the lands they were occupying. Remember, a treaty is an agreement that is made by negotiation, often with the goal of establishing peaceful relations and defining land rights. When British colonists came to Australia, they did not make a treaty with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Colonial settlement pushed Indigenous Australian peoples out of their lands. First Nations people in Australia have experienced trauma as a result of colonization, including violence, destruction of culture, and dispossession of land, as well as policies such as the forced removal of children. Welcome to country, an acknowledgement of country, is a very important way of giving Aboriginal people back their place in society. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have experienced a long history of dispossession. This means that since the arrival of the British in 1788, Indigenous peoples have had their land taken from them. What looked like empty land to the British colonists was actually sacred space to the Indigenous peoples. Aboriginal sacred sites have the same significance to Aboriginal peoples as churches, mosques, synagogues, gurdwara, and temples have to people of other faiths. Aboriginal ancestral burial sites have the same importance to Aboriginal peoples as cemeteries, sacred grave sites, and cremation rituals have to other cultures. For many First Nations people, land is a part of their culture, spirituality, language, law, family, and identity. For many First Nations people, colonization meant not only having land stolen, but people's core identities as well. In episode 5, we learned that between 1910 and the 1970s, the Australian government forcibly removed many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. These children became known as the Stolen Generations. Children taken from their parents were denied access to their families, communities, and cultures, and taught to reject their First Nations heritage in favor of white culture. The children's names were often changed, and many children were forbidden from speaking First Nations languages. Some children were adopted by white families, and many children were placed in institutions where abuse and neglect were common. The Stolen Generation survivors, their families, and descendants have experienced greater disadvantage than non-Indigenous Australians. In many First Nations families and communities, this trauma continues to be passed down from generation to generation with devastating effects. This is called intergenerational trauma and can be passed on through parenting practices, behavioral problems, violence, harmful substance use, and mental health issues. Policies of child removal are linked to high rates of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and poor physical health, mental health problems, addiction, incarceration, domestic violence, self-harm, and suicide in Indigenous communities. The disregard for Indigenous people's connection to country continued in the 1950s and 60s when the British and Australian governments tested atomic bombs on what they considered to be empty land in the middle of Australia. The Indigenous people from the area were forcibly removed from their homelands. The dense, radioactive clouds, however, traveled far across the land. For many Aboriginal people who still walk the Western Desert, many living traditionally, exposure to the black mists caused sickness and death. The sacred land of the Maralinga, Pitjantjatjara, and Kokatha peoples was destroyed, along with the culture, identity, and future of these Indigenous groups of people. For a large part of time, since the British colonized Australia, First Nations people haven't been accepted as equals in society and were still considered an inferior race. According to the National Museum of Australia, for much of Australia's political history, tens of thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people couldn't vote in state or federal elections. First Nations people still live with the reality of being part of a minority group of people who are often expected to conform with majority Anglo-Australian culture and lifestyle. First Nations people also live with the very real gap in well-being that affects their ability to thrive within broader Australian society. When non-Indigenous people, including new citizens of Australia, begin to understand the importance of land for First Nations people, we can begin to understand why dislocation from land has had such devastating effects on many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and cultures. As we grow in empathy and understanding, we begin to understand that the welcome to country and acknowledgement of country protocols are small things that can be done to show respect for Australia's Indigenous peoples. It's not about dividing or excluding non-Indigenous people. No one today is responsible for the pain resulting from our shared past, but the fact remains that a grave injustice remains unresolved. Learning about Indigenous culture and valuing and celebrating it in our mainstream society is one way we can begin to address the challenges of Indigenous disadvantage in Australia. Let's review the text from Traditions on page 12. Remember, the questions on the citizenship test will only use the words from the Our Common Bond booklet. Let's read it together. Traditions. Welcome to country and acknowledgement of country protocols. A welcome to country is a cultural practice performed by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander custodian of the local region, welcoming visitors to their traditional land. This was traditionally performed to ensure visitors had a safe and protected journey during their time on that land. A welcome to country can take place through many forms, including songs, dances, smoking ceremonies, or speeches in traditional language or English. A welcome to country is usually the first item of proceedings to open an event. An acknowledgement of country is an opportunity to recognize that the gathering is on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander land. Pay respect to traditional custodians, particularly elders past and present, and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance. An acknowledgement of country is usually delivered as part of the welcome and housekeeping at meetings and events. Anyone can deliver an acknowledgement of country. At meetings, events, this would generally be done by the chair or master of ceremonies. These practices are performed to show respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Let's have a look at a practice test question. Who can deliver a welcome to country? A. Anyone that lives on the land. B. An Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander custodian of the land. C. A master of ceremonies at an event on the land. If you guessed B, an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander custodian of the land, you are correct. Only Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples can deliver a welcome to country. That's it for today's episode. If you have any questions, please write them in the comment section. I'll do my best to help in any way I can. If you found this video helpful, please click on like and subscribe to help me grow this channel. This will also help you see when new episodes are ready to watch. See you in the next episode.